So I'd love to welcome to the Finding Ada conference Dr. Michelle Dickinson, who is the founder of Nano Girls Labs, a STEM education design company. Michelle, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you've spent 20 years working in nanotechnology and you worked in the medical and technical industries. How did you go from that to working with children to help them have a meaningful and enjoyable relationship with STEM?
Yeah, great question. So I've been an engineer, a commercial engineer for 20 years. I've worked across government, academia, and also in Silicon Valley for some of the cool high-tech companies. And I had the best time being an engineer, getting to make cool stuff that really changes the world. But I think, like many female engineers, when you're in that space, sometimes you feel like you're the only one. And I was definitely the only one on my teams. And I kept saying, oh, it'll get better, things are changing. But sadly, in my 20 years, things didn't change very much. And I wasn't seeing diversity increase as fast as I would like it to in the engineering space and in the STEM space in general. So I said, right, somebody should do something. And then I turned around and I was like, oh, I am somebody, okay. So I've been complaining for 20 years, I haven't done anything. Actually, I need to, if I want to make change, I need to do something. So stepped away from the formal career and decided to build Nano Girl Labs.
Fantastic. So your Nano Girl Labs, who is Nano Girl?
Yeah, so our whole mission is to help everybody have a meaningful relationship with science, technology, engineering, and maths. And we try and do that with young people by helping them to realize that science can help you build superpowers. And so one of the superpowers that I love to talk about is the superpower of nanotechnology, and how tiny technology can help, do things. And I was giving some talks in some schools and I was like, yes, I build these superpowers and I use nanotech and here's some of my examples. And the kids are like, well, obviously you need a superhero name. And I was like, obviously. And then I was thinking, I have no idea what that should be. And so these year 8 kids said, you should be Nano Girl. And I was like, you're right, I should be Nano Girl. So that's the first time the name came. And I was like, it's quite fun, I'll play with it a little bit. And then it sort of stuck. And I was like, well, if it's sticking, I better trademark it. So I trademarked it and it became something much bigger than I ever thought it was going to be.
Fantastic. So Nano Girl Labs, how long have you been doing this outreach and how have things changed over the years?
Yeah, so the company formed in 2016, but I was doing this when I was working as an academic at the University of Auckland, just as in my spare time, just going out to schools and doing some personal outreach. So the Nano Girl character has probably been around since 2012, just as a fun hobby for me, just sort of doing that. And then I took it really seriously in 2016 and formed an actual company with it. And at the time, it was just an extension of the outreach program I was doing as my side hustle. And now it's a global company. We sell into 135 countries around the world. We have about 400,000 subscribers. So yeah, it's grown a lot. We now have 15 full-time here in the office in Auckland. We have a London office, we have a California and a Vancouver office. So it's gone a bit nuts, which is, I guess, really good.
That is amazing growth. I mean, did you see that coming? Because I know with Ada Lovelace Day, I thought it was going to be me and a few friends, and then it did its own thing, and it took me like a decade to catch up. So, kind of, what do you wish you'd known before you started Nano Girl Labs? Before you became Nano Girl?
Yeah, I wish I'd known. Well, look, it's all. So I made a decision with Nano Girl Labs. I'd set up a tech charity in the past, and actually, the challenge with charities is you're always waiting for the next donation, and it means you don't have security around funding. So I decided to set up Nano Girl Labs as a for-profit business where we choose to reinvest our profits back into helping those who couldn't afford our programs. And I wish I'd have known at the beginning that that was going to be really challenging in the spaces we work in, because it means we're not eligible for many different grants. It means that, a lot of philanthropic donors only donate to charitable enterprises. And so I realized that we suddenly excluded ourselves from many things. So it meant that we had to be really creative around fundraising as a for-profit business and really have some big conversations about how you could be a for-profit business for good. And profit isn't a bad word. And I wish I'd have known that earlier on, because I think we stumbled at the beginning to try and figure out who we were and get that point across. But I'm really glad we did it that way.
Yeah. So actually, Ada Lovelace does exactly the same. And I think being a for-profit gives you more agility, so you can change and do what you need to do as conditions change. So what has been the key thing for you in terms of your growth and how things have changed? I mean, how did you achieve that kind of growth? Because it's amazing. I'm in awe.
A couple of things. One, an amazing, passionate team. Finding your tribe and finding people who have the same values and believe in the same mission means that, everybody wants this to work. And so we have this incredible team, all of which are female STEM professionals. So, I have an office full of amazing women engineers and women scientists, and so I feel really lucky. Number two is being ready to adapt and change really quickly. So we had a huge audience because we used to do a lot of global touring we've got huge theatre shows, our cookbook, and so we do live shows. And then COVID happened and we had to stop all of that, so we had to move really quickly into the digital space. And so our magic was figuring out what worked really well in our live shows and how we could translate that to digital faster than anybody else, more accessible than anybody else. So our secret is a great team, but also being there when everybody needs us with what they need. And so being really agile, which I think is really important. And COVID has taught us all we need to be as agile as possible.
Absolutely, yeah. It's well, this entire conference exists because of COVID, so yeah, I hear you. So tell us a little bit more. Give us a tour of Nanogirl Labs. What is it that you do?
We do the most ridiculous things. And so basically we build engagements that help people develop a love and a passion for science and engineering and maths. And we do it in ways that people don't expect. So we have a live global, it's science pantomime, basically. It's an amazing pantomime show where the two characters, Nanogirl and Boris, and their artificially intelligent system, Claire, basically get out of trouble, but live, using real science experiments and engineering. And they build their way out of trouble, and it's explosive, and it's ridiculous, and it's sort of the only thing in the world that does that, and the only science show in the world that has a female engineer lead. And so whoever plays that, they're either a female scientist or engineer in that space, so it's also positive role modeling. So we do that. We have our online Nanogirls Lab, which is a whole bunch, about 60 now, different hands-on experiments to build superpowers. So we have, I think, 8 different superpower themes that you can build towards. So build towards a superpower of flight, for example, and then there are these really interesting experiments and builds that you could do using only stuff that you would find at home. We also do a lot of work in the charitable space. So we currently are rebuilding the Year 10 science curriculum for 4 Pacific Island nations, but bringing Indigenous learning into those to try and help students from the Pacific Islands to not only study science, but also achieve the science level that they need to then go on to university. So we're pretty broad in what we do.
Wow, you sound incredibly busy in what you do as well. So in terms of how you develop these projects, so particularly around the Pacific Islands project, how did that get started? What prompted you to do that?
So we had initially, in New Zealand, the Indigenous population, the Māori population, really lacked an engagement in STEM, and were not achieving the standards compared to some of the other students. So I wanted to try and work on that and figure out, could I contribute anything to help with the achievement standards? And so we built basically a bilingual science show that incorporated the Indigenous science here, what's called Mataranga Māori, which is the understanding of how the earth forms and some of the atua, or the gods. So there's the god of the sky and the god of the ocean, and how are some of those stories and beliefs that are in this Indigenous population, how they apply to some of the Western terms that we use in science. And actually we brought together a show that was bilingual and brought these two belief systems together, and we toured that around New Zealand, and it was so incredible for some of our Māori children to go, oh, I see, this thing that I know innately is what is also in science called this. I hadn't realized that they were connected. And, you know, sadly, our education systems tend to be Western science connected. And so if we could make these connections to go, you're already a scientist, you're already smart, we just haven't used these words around you. And if you recognize that these words mean the same thing that you innately have been taught and you know, then maybe you can help achieve on the exams that sadly are what you need to get into tertiary education. And in doing that, we realized that there was very little indigenous knowledge put into science because a lot of it is from Western textbooks. And so we said, actually, if we want populations to engage, they have to see science that's relevant to them, that uses language and ideas and beliefs that are relevant to them. And so, yeah, we took on this massive project in the Pacific Islands, and it's just been beautiful.
It sounds absolutely fantastic. And I think it's so important to go to where people are and speak to people in their own language, not just their own linguistic language, but their own conceptual language. You know, how difficult was it, and how did you develop that program? Who did you work with to bring those two cultures together?
Yeah, so, you know, it's not my culture, and so I never want to be the savior that comes in and, you know, teaches people science. And so we sit and we listen a lot. We work with the local communities. With COVID, we've had to do this remotely because we can't visit the Pacific Islands right now. But we have weekly listening meetings with our leaders in the communities that we're working with to try and hear the stories, understand some of the challenges, and then work together. And so it very much is a collaboration between two different communities who have the same belief, which we all want the students to excel. But it really is a lot of listening rather than a lot of thinking you have the solution. And the solution is never what I think it's going to be when I go in, because it's not my community, it's not my knowledge. But I do think because I am of mixed race and I have grown up with multiple cultures, I was probably a little bit more aware of cultural norms and differences in cultures to education. And so I'm part Chinese, and I grew up when I was a child with Chinese medicine, you know, acupuncture and herbs. And then I moved to England as a kid, and then there was all this Western medicine, you know, prescriptions, and it was quite jarring for me as a child. And I've always kept that with me, that actually what you know and what you believe in, it truly is how you see the world. And so, yeah, we work really hard to try and understand how people see the world, and then how we can help offer guidance to bring the worlds together.
Fantastic. And I think as well that it needs humility, which you obviously have in spades. You have to approach these things very much with like an open heart and being very receptive. And it's obviously very important to you to work with underserved communities. What else do you do with them? I mean, the science show sounds amazing. You know, where else can you take that?
Yeah, so, you know, everything we build has a access package to it. So our science shows, we have a gifting system. It's basically an honesty box that says, hey, if you can't afford to come, we have tickets that are either really cheap or just apply here for a free ticket, and we won't judge you on that. We'd love every family to come. And so our ticket prices are based on that every portion of a ticket sold actually goes towards funding tickets for those families that just would never be able to afford to take a whole family to a theatre. We're really clear that most of our systems have a buy one, give one program in them. So when you buy one from us, we work with local charities around the world to donate to children who just wouldn't have access to these things. And so accessibility is part of what we do, and that's really important. And working with different communities in different ways. So we have a science school in Fiji that only works with girls who live in squatter settlements, and in these squatter settlements they have no running water, no electricity, and we're working with these girls for the next 15 years to try and not only keep them in school, they're most likely to drop out of school from the age of 13, but also help them maybe even go to tertiary. And to do that, we have to help them and their families. And so that's one of our long-term programs that I am really excited about and is really dear to me. So yeah, I have found in my time, and I've written a book about inventors and sort of who becomes an inventor, and it's typically those who haven't had much to start with, and so are open to designing their own future. And that's why I think the most potential comes in those who would typically come from underserved communities.
And how important is it to get tech into some of these communities and internet access and those sorts of things that we take for granted?
Look, I always say it's important, but some of the girls I'm working with don't even have access to food, running water, or electricity. And so I say the tech is important, but the fundamentals for life are the most important. And then the tech comes with that. So we have a whole tech program in our Fiji program that doesn't use computers at all. So we teach coding through weaving, and we incorporate the grandmothers who have woven baskets their whole lives and talk about pattern recognitions and algorithms, and so the tech isn't always the solution, because there's no point in teaching technology if they have no access to it at home because they can't charge it or any internet. So tech is important in some communities, but for some of our girls, it just isn't.
Fantastic. Your science show has been, it is international. It's been translated into a number of languages, I think 5. Again, that is such a huge undertaking. Taking the show on the road, translating it into other languages. I presume that means you have to find performers in other languages as well. How? That seems enormous on its own.
It is enormous, but when you find those people, you know they're the right people. So we have an Arabic nano girl who performs in Arabic, and I really wanted in our Middle Eastern countries that we could have a nano girl that looked like somebody that you would be familiar with. And so, you know, she has a head covering. She's really passionate about being a female role model scientist who looks Arabic, speaks Arabic, and to our Arabic community is the most positive role model. We have a Chinese nano girl who, you know, is ethnically Chinese and speaks Chinese, and so a lot of our Chinese young children see her as such a positive role model. So it was really important for me to make sure we weren't just translating, but we were actually providing local role models that serve those communities. And yeah, it's hard to find them, but once you do, you know, and then you hunt them down and you're like, please, please be a nano girl. And who wouldn't want to be a positive role model for local children? They're all really great.
Absolutely. Now, I actually saw the Kitchen Science Show at the Taronga STEM Festival in 2019, and I was absolutely blown away by it. It was so good. You've actually written a couple of books around the kitchen science. Can you tell us a bit about that, and what sort of inspired you to develop that show and those books?
Yeah, so the book was rejected by all the publishers who thought it was a really stupid idea, just so you know. So if you have a great idea and somebody says, don't do it, but you really believe in it, I think this lesson is still do it. I am really aware of what we call intergenerational fear of STEM. And the research shows it typically comes from mothers. So mothers who are afraid of maths may say to their daughters, oh, don't worry about maths, I'm terrible at it, it's really hard. And so the daughter then believes that, oh, well, my mom can't do it, therefore I can't. And I really felt like there were a lot of parents, especially mothers, who didn't feel like they were strong in the STEM subjects, but actually were showing this all the time. And one of those times is baking. So we know that cooking and baking is just chemistry and engineering. But when I would say that to mothers who were baking for me, they would be like, no, it's baking, I'm terrible at science. And I thought, well, if I can crack this code of empowering mothers to realize that they were scientists and engineers through their baking, maybe they would spend time with their daughters and their sons building up their confidence because they felt more confident. So I brought a copy with me. So this was the original Kitchen Science Cookbook. I wanted it to look like a cookbook, not a science book, because people who aren't into science aren't going to pick a science book. And inside it are recipes that you can use things from around the house to basically figure out how to make delicious and nutritious, and sometimes not delicious and nutritious, science experiments using things that you find at home. So this was the self-published book. We did a Kickstarter. It actually became really successful through that. And then all the publishers who said they weren't interested in us called us and said, hey, your book's done so well, we didn't believe you. But so it's then become, in the UK, the Kitchen Science Cookbook, published by Penguin Random House. And then in America, it's become Kitchen Cabinet Science Projects, which is a different name, but the same book, for the American audience. So it's been really interesting to see the same concept sort of spread around the world, and now it's sold in every country around the world. It's translated into I don't know how many languages. And then we turn that into a show. So it's a cooking show where you can learn how to cook and all the science behind your favourite recipes. And then here in New Zealand, it's become 2 series of a TV show where you can follow the recipes while you're watching it.
Wow. So That's amazing. I mean, just to go from that, like one idea that no one was interested in, and now it's on TV. And how did that happen? How did you get on TV? How did you
Perseverance.
translate it?
Just constantly annoying people and being like, this is great, this will be great. People are like, you're nuts. Yeah, so persistence and constantly just networking with people, trying to push ideas, especially making other people think it was their idea is a good one. But, I get so many rejections. I don't know, hundreds of rejections a year from ideas that I have that people just aren't interested in. So the ones you see that are successful are just a tiny little sort of inkling into all the things that I'm trying to push.
Fantastic. And can you give us a little bit of an introduction to the TV show? Is it just a replication of the in-person show? How did you adapt it?
Yeah, so the TV show is like a cooking show. So I host and then I bring in families and I give them the recipe and we cook together and we learn along the way about all of the secret bits. So the series 2 is recipes that aren't in this book. And so one of them is how to make sausage rolls. And actually, the pastry of sausage rolls are a really complicated laminated engineering structure. And so we go through why, when you're making this puff pastry, why all the folds matter, why you need to chill the butter. And so it's really technical parts that make the perfect sausage roll, but actually all the engineering that needs to go into that. So this laminated puff pastry is delightfully airy and fluffy and crispy at the same time. So yeah, it's run like a real cooking show, and I just, as the host, help the people on the show, the families, to make the perfect recipe.
Fantastic. I wish that would come to that needs to be on television everywhere, frankly. So you've actually spoken about being an introvert, and yet you're on TV. How you do all these science shows? How do you balance that kind of introversion with having a public persona and public speaking?
Yeah, so when the character name Nana Girl was given to me by these year 8 students, I didn't really do much public speaking other than to children. And then I was asked to do a TEDx talk, and I was petrified. It just wasn't going to work with my introverted state. So I went to see an acting coach, and I said, I've got to give this talk in public, and I'm petrified, and I'm just not really a public speaker. And she said to me, oh, well, we'll just be an actor. Just go on stage and act it out. Just think of a character that you would like to be and pretend you're that person. And then you don't have to bring your true self to it, or your introverted self. You can just portray a different character. And so we worked on the character of Nana Girl. If she was real, what would she be? And she would be extroverted and all of these amazing things. And so I've learned to sort of play a character on stage where it's all the things I wish, I was sometimes when it comes to public speaking, but I'm just naturally not. And it allows that separation for me of character versus who I actually am, which is a really boring, quiet Friday night with my books and my slippers type of person. And also I'm quite public about my introversion. So if you do meet me in public and I'm a bit socially awkward, and if I leave the party at first because I don't like big crowds, people are now accepting of that and know how to deal with me, and that I'd rather a one-on-one meeting. So being public about it has also allowed me to have permission to go, hey, I don't work like this. I don't want big events. I don't want big functions. If you want to chat with me, can we do it one-on-one? Can we have a coffee? It's just the way that my brain naturally works. And so it's been great to talk about how I have my coping strategies, but also how I work best. So hopefully people can help me to work at my best.
I think that's really fascinating. I'm a bit of an ambivert. I'm kind of introverted in some circumstances, extroverted in others, and people who see me in one don't believe that I'm me when I'm in the other. And this sense of having these coping strategies, like, I think we don't talk about that enough. So I think it's amazing and really, really powerful that you do talk about it. In terms of going back to the superpowers and Nana Girl, on your website you talk about inspiring children to build superpowers through science, and this concept of a superhero having superpowers is so well established, at least in Western sort of fiction. How important is it to use these sorts of narrative tools, particularly when you're working with children?
Yeah, so we've passed on knowledge since we were cave people through stories. and our brains really understand stories and remember stories well. And so for us, having a narrative is crucial to everything that we do. And the superhero narrative is just one of the narratives that we have depending on the products that we have, because, you know, we all remember great stories, and the emotional roller coaster you can go on there. And you know, for us, when we set up our stories, there's always a problem to solve, or somebody in need, or somebody to help. And we found that young people are passionate about helping others and solving problems. And, you know, sometimes when you're in maths and you're, you know, trying to expand out brackets and you're like, I don't care about these brackets. But if we could give you a problem to solve with a real narrative that made you passionate about figuring out how many, whatever it is that you need to solve the problem, we found that young people really connect to the problem, not to the brackets of the maths that needs to do it. And so, yeah, we bring narrative into everything because we found it to be a really powerful way across all communities to pass down knowledge and to share information, but also to retain the relevance of what we're doing long term. And it's really funny, a good example of that, one of the stories we have is there's a character who loses his keys down the drain, and they try and problem solve it. And Nanogirl goes, oh, I'll just put a magnet on a stick and I can fish them out. And recently, a courier dropped his keys outside the drain for our office in real life. And I ran out, I'm like, wait, we have the solution. And I stuck a magnet onto a broom handle and pulled it out. And like magic, it worked. And I think those things, you know, where young people can see that they could use this in real life, help all of these subjects come to life and help them to stick with, I think, the boring bits in school because they realize that it could be useful one day.
Yeah, and it's not just the science that is useful, it's also the lateral thinking, it's also teaching persistence and resilience. And how much do you think about these extra dimensions that you're sort of like bringing into what you're teaching?
So one of the things we've seen, especially with girls, is a fear of failure and a reluctance to try something new, especially science, if you fail at it the first time. And so we have a new program which is coming out called Nanogirl's Mistakes, which is all about the times that Nanogirl has made a mistake or stuffed something up and what she's learned from it. And then going back in history to look at some of the most amazing inventions that were invented by mistake. Penicillin, for example, was because, you know, Alexander Fleming didn't do the washing up and went on holiday. You know, there are all these the post-it notes where somebody inventing the stickiest super glue, it didn't stick, but post-it notes are amazing. And so, yeah, trying to have these conversations that you don't have to get it right all the time. Problem solving is all about trial and error, and figuring out how to do something differently is a crucial skill that sometimes when you're doing an exam at school, you're always thinking about how do I get this right, not about what is the process. And even if I got it wrong, I learned so much along the way that I have progressed and moved forwards. And so we try and have those bigger conversations.
I think it's very easy as well for parents because of the gender stereotypes that everyone kind of learns by osmosis purely through existing to tell boys to get back on the horse, you know, it didn't work out, try again, and to say to girls, well, there, at least you tried. Yeah, how can we counter this? Because I do think it's really important to teach girls to persist and to keep trying, and yet the messaging that they're constantly getting is like, oh, well, you know, you tried science, maybe you'd be better at languages. So what do we need to do to get parents and educators on board with encouraging girls back up on that horse?
Yeah, and a lot of this is unconscious, right? We don't realise that we're bringing these unconscious biases with us, and we speak differently sometimes to our daughters than to our sons. It's just something that, you know, we've sort of grown up with. So at Nanogirl, we run teacher training programs where we talk about these things and how to make sure that failure is a big part of success in your classroom. And with parents, bring them in to do workshops with us. We do have these big conversations around, you know, and it's really with the girl, when I do the all girls schools, like, is when it's the most. So I do mothers and daughters workshops, and some of the experiments we do are messy. And I instantly see that some mums don't want their daughters to get messy. They're fine with their sons. And so we have these big conversations with the mothers going, it's okay, you can wash it. And it's just that uncomfortable zone, but you're in a safe place where you go, just let them be. and then step back. But it's going to take a long time, I think, because some of these things are ingrained in us and we don't even realize why we do them. It's just been something that we're surrounded by. So I think we've got a long way to go. But I think if we can keep this in schools and help all students, but especially our girls, to build confidence when they get things wrong, I think it will really help to improve things.
Yeah. And there was a survey in the UK a few years ago around engineering, and that only 3% of parents and 3% of mothers would recommend engineering to their daughters, and the main reason was because they thought engineering was dirty. And this is a thing, is that, like, you know, the how we encourage girls to get their hands dirty and encourage their parents to let them is really important. So how much of your science show, how much hands-on stuff do you get to do with the kids?
Oh, it's all hands-on pretty much. Even in our stage shows, we probably invite up maybe 8 or 9 volunteers per show to do something hands-on with Nana Girl and Boris on stage. So everything we do is helping kids to basically realize that they're creators and create with us, and show them that you need no training to come up and build something amazing. Like, we can build a hoverboard or we can build a rocket, and then hopefully go home. And the great thing about bringing young people up on stage in all the workshops that we do is every other young person goes, oh, well, if they can do it, they have no training, then maybe I could do it. So that positive role modeling isn't just in the presenters that we have, but it's also in suddenly putting a young person up as the role model, going, well, they came with no experience and they can do it. So, you know, it means that anybody can do this.
And how do schools get involved? How do community groups get involved? Like, you know, Nano Girl just sounds fantastic. It's something that I would want to see in every school. How does that happen?
So we have free videos for teachers. We have a whole educational TV show called Breaking It Down for teachers. In New Zealand, we do what's called professional development training. So there's a full day hands-on workshops where you are Nana Girl trained in science experiments and ways to teach with our programs. So there are lots of ways. If you're not in New Zealand, then digitally just log on to the nanagirl.co and go to the teachers section, and there's a whole bunch of resources that sort of help with the way that we think about teaching about STEM subjects, and also increasing teachers' confidence in maybe fields that they haven't thought about yet, you know, especially in the STEM subjects.
I feel sometimes like we need to really get into teacher training colleges and really get trainee teachers thinking about women in the curriculum and how to present science and maths. But I think, you know, certainly in the UK, and I get the sense in the US as well, it's like teachers are just so flat out. They're just so busy all the time that they don't have the bandwidth to take new information in. You know, is there a role in terms of for organisations like ours in terms of campaigning around policy changes at the governmental level?
Look, I mean, I always say yes, but I think that, like you said, teachers are so busy, and also teachers probably don't come from a STEM background. They probably haven't worked in a science career their whole life. They're probably not exposed to all of these different nuances and the different types of engineering, you know, and so they're getting their messages, and like the rest of us, from Facebook and from the media. And so the things I lobby really hard for are representation in our media, and making sure that the next time a science TV show is made, that you've got somebody who represents a diverse community. Because even if you look now at the TV shows being made, you know, it was very unusual for me to be hosting a TV show that was made on science, but to do that I had to build the show, fund the show, you know, and get a production team and a TV station who was willing to commit to that. But typically those shows are still not very diverse in their representation, and I think that is going to change the way that we can view these people on the mass level, and teachers will be part of watching that.
No, absolutely. So we all want to have impact. That's kind of why we do what we do. How do you measure the impact of your work, and how do you know if it's working or not?
Yeah, we're really clear on impact. So we have a full-time impact and PhD hire here who all their job is to look at the impact that all of our programs make. And then we publish that data. So we publish white papers on what works, what doesn't work, to help people getting into this space to go, well, I'm not going to repeat that because Nana Girl did it and it didn't work, or they did it but this bit didn't work, so we'll modify and see if we can do it better. So we do pre and post surveys with all of our programs for the people who engage in it, and we do long-term studies. Our Fiji program is obviously a 15-year study, so that's a very long-term study, and then we publish it. So we're able to look at things like confidence level, belief level. As a child, what do you think an engineer or scientist does before you come into our programs, and then after, has that changed your perspective? And our big impact measurement is, do you think you could be one? We don't care if you are one or not. We just want that mentality of going, actually, yes, I think STEM could be something that I could use to help me solve problems. That's our bigger goal. I mean, you can be an artist, you can study film and media, but those STEM concepts are going to be really useful in all of those industries, especially around technology in the film industry right now. And so we don't measure whether or not you go on to study STEM subjects. We just measure that you are open to using them in whatever it is that you want to be.
Yeah. Because of course STEM isn't just for STEM academia and STEM industries. There's science and tech and engineering and maths in a lot of jobs, a lot of careers, but also in a lot of just generalized situations like dropping your keys down the drain. So, you know, when we talk to children about STEM, I think sometimes there's this very, very much a focus on careers, and that's good and important, but what I see in what you're doing is that you actually make it much more mundane in a very good way. That this is something that you can do at home in the kitchen. You can do it around your local storm drain as well if you want to. How does that develop, that theme that you can use STEM all the time? How do we get more children and frankly adults understanding the STEM that is all around them?
Yeah, so we just ran a walking tour around our city centre this weekend to show you all the different STEM in, you know, the buildings around you and things. So for us, it's normalising what is normal for you, but showing you that somebody has thought about it, engineered something specifically, and just showing you that it literally is everywhere. And also that I try and storytell around examples of when big problems have been solved because somebody who's not in the STEM field but has a STEM mindset has come in and solved a STEM problem, for example, because sometimes what you need is diversity of people. And so if you're going to invent something new, usually it's invented by somebody who from the outside goes, oh, what if you guys solved your problem this way? Because everybody inside was so focused on solving it the way that they knew to solve it that actually they couldn't see a totally different way. And so, yeah, we just try and build confidence in what STEM is, how you use STEM every single day, and therefore you're always going to be a problem solver. And so wherever the problem is, you can now use that way of thinking to solve all sorts of challenges in your community. And that's, I think, very different to what a lot of other organizations do, which is getting the people into careers. We know that young people are probably going to have 7 careers in their lifetime. So STEM might not be the first one they get into, but they might use those skills later on to, you know, become the digital specialist for their organization or future-proof, you know, their STEM thinking for their organization. And especially if they go onto boards, you know, suddenly you've got to think about, you know, all the different technologies that might come into your organization. And so you have to have that mindset, whatever your background is.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So you mentioned earlier your book about innovations and their inventors called Number 8 Recharged, which you wrote with David Downs. Can you tell us a little bit more about that book? How did it happen, and what does it mean to you to write about these inventors?
Yeah, so number 8 recharge. So number 8 wire mentality is the New Zealand way of just using number 8 wire, which is sort of a farming wire that you find on the end of farm fences, to sort of jerry-rig a solution really quickly just to solve your problem. And so that mentality is, how can I use what I have in front of me to solve a problem? And I'm really interested in inventors and their inventions and how they came about. Because I think when I was a young person, I always thought that inventors were really smart, academic type people who had been professors their whole life and then used their life work to invent something new. But as I started researching it, I realized that a lot of the inventors, especially those in my book, were just random people who saw a problem and figured out that because it wasn't their field, they might be able to solve it differently. And I love that mindset. So most of these inventors actually failed high school or dropped out of university because their mindset was, I don't need this academic education to solve a problem. I just want to get my hands dirty and build something to fix it. And I really wanted to tell the stories of, where these people came from. A lot of them came from low socioeconomic backgrounds. And so they're used to, rather than buying things new, fixing things or building things from scratch to solve a problem. And that mindset, I think, is what's going to get us out of some of the biggest challenges we have in the world when we talk about global warming, about food scarcity. Actually, it's those problem solvers who go, what do we have right now? How can we help to solve a problem today? Those are the people that I think we need to celebrate. And I think we're really good at celebrating academic credentials and I have all these certificates, but not actually, how did I solve a problem using literally all I have right now, using people who I know around me who are different to me to think about a problem differently. So number 8, Recharge is a fun book, and David Downs is a fun character, and he just said, we should write this. And I'm like, yeah, I always say yes to opportunities if I can. And so we did, and young people are loving it because it shows very different career pathways into ways that you can really build big global changing solutions. You don't necessarily need big global budgets.
Funny, because I actually think the mindset that you're talking about also hooks back into the kitchen science. It's about being able to look at what you have around you and being able to adapt rather than having to follow a recipe specifically. It's like, oh, I don't have the tarragon, I can't possibly cook that. And just having that...
And we've all bought that recipe book, right? Where it's beautiful and then you realize you don't have any of the ingredients. My whole goal was to make sure that everything we produce here you would have in your cupboard at home. It's quite a hard goal, but I grew up in a low-income family, and so I look at a lot of the science resources for young children out there now, and my family would never have been able to afford that. And so I've always tried to create things that my family would be able to do as well as everybody else. And so that's a big part of the mentality of what Nana Girl is how do you find something that you have lying around already that's not going to cost you any more money to be able to do this experiment.
So to wrap up, although I could have this conversation for hours, if there's someone out there watching who wants to become their own Nana Girl, wants to start an organisation like yours, what are the key things that you've learned over the last kind of 5 or so years, and where should people start?
I always say start by looking at the ecosystem. Don't reinvent the wheel. There are so many organizations doing amazing things. Make sure you know the landscape first, and then find a niche that isn't sort of being catered to, making sure that you're collaborating with everybody else. I think one of the challenges I see is there's a lot of STEM outreach organizations that do their own thing, but they don't share their data, so nobody's learning together. And they're quite, oh, this is my group, this is the way we do it. And so we at Nana Girl Labs try and collaborate with all organizations going, we're here for the same mission, so let's try and make sure that we work together to do that. So yeah, don't reinvent the wheel, see what's already out there. See if you can collaborate with others first to build their program bigger. And if not, try and fill the little niche that isn't being filled right now for a certain community, because you're going to have way more impact if you're not competing with other outreach organizations, but actually collaborating with them.
I again, in solid agreement with you there. I mean, it has been amazing over the last 10, 12 years to watch how the landscape has blossomed, and there are so many groups catering to so many different audiences, and that is fantastic. But sometimes I think there is a little bit of repetition, and there's not much in the way of resources. So, this is the big question, is like, how do we increase the amount of resources that are available to organisations supporting girls and women in STEM?
Yeah, and look, I think there are lots of resources out there. I just think they're being spread really thin because there are so many competing organizations. And so I go back to the beginning. If we all work together, if we, take off our hats and go, it's not about the Nano Girl program. It's about how do we build communities that we can elevate, and how do we share this resource wisely? And so one of the things we're doing at Nana Girl is going to some of the organizations that are smaller than us and going, well, can we help you spend less money by having to have your own admin? What if you came in and shared our admin so that the money can go further? And so a lot of the money wastage I see is because small organizations have so many different things that they're having to run within their organization, rather than going, if we set up a consortium, we can have one set of bureaucrats to help us all, and we're not wasting that. So I think the money is out there. I just don't think we're spending it efficiently right now.
I think that, again, very, very good point. So in terms of the near future, New Zealand has dealt with COVID a lot better than many countries. Some of us either are sort of under some form of lockdown, or should be under some form of lockdown, or wish we were under some form of lockdown. This is kind of, for you, the pandemic hasn't maybe been quite as problematic as it has in other countries. But that, you still had to go online, and there's still always the risk of further lockdowns. How are you developing Nano Girl Labs in the face of this pandemic, and what is coming up for you like this year and next year?
Yeah, so look, in New Zealand, we were really lucky. We followed an elimination strategy, which was really strict, but it's meant that we've had pretty much freedom through the whole pandemic internally, but we can't travel and our borders are closed. So for Nano Girl Labs, where 80% of our revenue was global touring revenue, that made a big hit on our business, which is why we went online. We've decided, because we can't leave New Zealand and we can't travel and we can't do our global shows, to really focus on the New Zealand population this year. So we have a couple of new products that I'm super excited about. We have a Clever Creatures investigation kit, which is all about New Zealand indigenous insects and creepy crawlies, and so that kit is launching for Christmas. We also have a build your own Bluetooth speaker box that's coming out in the next 2 months, which has been built by some of the young girls that I've been mentoring for a long time who wanted to build their own business. So we're helping them. It's taught by teenagers for teenagers. So we have some really cool local products. And then the hope is, fingers crossed, in 2022 we can get back on the road and open up more of our global live touring programs. But yeah, it's still New Zealand only for the next 6 months.
Fantastic. Well, good luck with all of that, especially the Creepy Crawlies kit, which sounds absolutely amazing. I can't wait for the whole pandemic thing to be over so I can come and visit again and watch another one of your shows. If anyone is watching in New Zealand and has the opportunity to see a live show, you really, really must. They are so good. They're just so much fun. So thank you so much, Michelle. It's been such a joy talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Fantastic. And good luck with Nano Girl Labs.
Thank you. We might need it.